Welcome to the Digging Deep podcast, where we offer bereavement bites for time-pressed bereavement professionals. I'm your host, Heather Kiteley, President and CEO of GFD. For today's podcast episode, we have Hamza Majid, who is the Manager of Financial Compliance at the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, also known, of course, as the BAO. Hamza started at the BAO in January of 2021, and before that had extensive experience in the financial services industry. He was involved in external consultancy that included due diligence, credit risk, compliance, regulation. I could go on, mostly with large corporations and government institutions. So you've kind of had your finger in just about every little piece of financial services that one can have.
Yeah.
Since starting at the BAO almost 4 years ago, Hamza has been tasked with resolving many issues for the bereavement sector regarding financial compliance specifically. Hamza has made a positive impact on cultural changes. You really do have an awesome team, specifically in his initiatives towards innovation. Some of the challenges he was tasked with were designing a framework to account for and monitor the 4 billion, that's with a B, of consumer money spread across 3,000 plus trust funds across 60 financial institutions. I feel like it's more than 3,000 plus. I think 300,000 plus would be more accurate.
Right.
Yeah. Implementing procedures to identify fraud, financial misappropriation of consumer funds, enhancing educational requirements and standards for licensees, increasing the effectiveness and efficiency of the bereavement sector compliance methods, and enhancing educational requirements and standards for licensees. With Hamza's efforts, the BAO can account for every single dollar in pre-need sales and care maintenance funds. Wow. Outside of work, Hamza enjoys spending time outdoors, fishing, hunting, and camping, and you would get along with all my northern relatives so well. Today we're going to be talking about financial compliance in the bereavement sector. And this is an area that I'm super passionate about, and you and I have talked about this at length before. So welcome, Hamza.
Thank you very much.
We're so excited to have you at the podcast.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Yep.
let's learn a little bit about you.
Sure.
So you're fairly new to the bereavement space, 2021.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your journey to get here, and then let's talk a little bit about what you love about the bereavement sector.
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much, Heather, for having me here. I came across the bereavement sector late in my life, I would say. Right. A lot of individuals have an incident in their life where they experience, maybe going to a cemetery, a funeral home, but unlike those situations, mine was a unique one.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about it.
Found a house right beside a cemetery, and one day I thought of just walking in and strolling around, and that's where I got to meet a few cemetery professionals who were
so
there.
you ran into cemetery
Yes,
professionals as you're walking.
just
I love it.
mowing the lawn, taking care of the markers, for example. Got to chat a bit with them, and then I started digging about the bereavement sector in the province.
Pun intended. Go ahead.
And then I came across the BAO, of course. That they're the regulators, and there's a lot of work that the BAO has been doing, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done as well. And call it a coincidence. There was a job opening,
Wow.
which was very relevant to what I was looking for. Right, there were challenges that needed to be resolved and worked upon, and that's how I got into the sector.
That's amazing. What a great story. I didn't know
Okay.
that about you.
Yeah,
You just go for a walk in the cemetery and the rest of your life path falls into place.
right.
It's beautiful.
Right.
So, since discovering the sector,
Yep.
let's start with funeral. So, what is something that you love about funeral professionals or about the funeral side?
And I say this often: funeral professionals are built differently, right? You're one, so
We're all a little bit
all
weird.
right.
In the best possible
In
way.
the best possible way, right? I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of funeral professionals in the past 4 years of my experience at the BAO. They are doing all they can to ensure that families get the right support at the worst possible times in their life, right? And usually there are different professions who would be in a similar situation, but they might expect some return for their services, right? It could be monetary, it could be a reward, but funeral professionals don't expect that. And being a numbers guy, I've seen financials of a lot of institutions, funeral institutions, and I've seen that they go to the extent of even incurring a loss when it comes to making those families happy with the services that they provide. So, you know, salute to them.
I love that you talk about that. And I love that you see that because if you think about media,
Yep.
right? Like the funeral professional is the person that everyone loves to hate. That we're like the favorite bashing,
Yep.
focal point for movies
Right.
or, that image of the undertaker who's just waiting to take people's money, which is like could not be farther from the truth.
Agreed.
We've got to figure out a way to get everybody to see that. I always tell my friends outside of the sector that like you need to know funeral directors because they are magical people.
There
right?
are, for sure.
Who else can you call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Exactly.
And they'll be like, yeah, we're here for you.
Very true.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the cemetery side.
For sure. So, I've had the opportunity to, again, visit a lot of cemeteries, meet with a lot of cemetery professionals, but what I've noticed is these are these are the individuals who actually preserve heritage and culture. That's the most basic way I can define them, because without them, cemeteries wouldn't exist. And coming from a different continent, I know that cemeteries in at least this province are one of the best cemeteries I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And if you look at these cemeteries, you wouldn't even believe there are plots dating back, 1700s, 1800s, and they've been kept top notch in terms of their maintenance, right? So again, these cemetery professionals aren't looking for anything in return, right? They're just doing it to preserve heritage and history and provide a grieving place for families. So yeah.
It's so wonderful, isn't it? Like I am late to the cemetery sector, as they say, right? Because I was mostly on the funeral side, and getting to know cemetery professionals, like warm, like they're so warm, they're so like caring, they're
Agreed.
so dedicated to the work, and their work is hard,
Right.
Like their work
They're
is
very
crazy hard.
passionate. They're very
Yeah.
passionate of what they do. I've had the opportunity with speaking with a lot of volunteer-run cemeteries. So these are volunteer boards who dedicate the rest of their lives
Yeah.
caring for these cemeteries, and they are nervous on who would take over after they've passed away. They're actually concerned, and they give us a call on Hamza. What happens next? We need to plan for succession. Can
Yeah.
you help us?
Yeah,
Right.
right? That came up in the conference. We were
Yes.
talking about that yesterday
Yes.
in the meeting about how, and interesting to hear those operators saying, like, we don't know what's going to happen,
Right.
Who's interested in this space?
Right.
Maybe the millennials. I've had a few conversations with folks about how millennials, and this was today in the panel discussion as well, about how millennials look at this space differently.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Not us
And I
old,
think the comment made yesterday would really help if we start introducing cemeteries at a high school or college level, so that we can actually pick up people who would dedicate some time, starting with some time, and eventually dedicating their full times to cemeteries, because cemeteries need people,
they do need people.
right? If you leave them, they would go into disrepair, and eventually with the municipalities. So it's best that we start early
Yeah.
and plan 100 years in advance.
Key takeaway for our listeners: we need people to help
For
the
sure,
cemeteries.
for sure.
All right, let's dig into our topic here. So let's talk a little bit about the BAO. How does the BAO assist funeral providers and cemeteries in understanding to meet their financial compliance? Because of course, you and I have talked about this before. Funeral directors and cemeterians are very busy serving the needs of people, and financial compliance is like the thing that has to get done at some
Right.
point. So talk to me a little bit about how you support the sector in that.
Sure, and a lot of people try to avoid the financial compliance part,
Of course.
but unfortunate, but fortunately, it's part of the legislation.
Yep. Important
We've
part.
been mandated to enforce the act, which requires our establishment licensees to report to us on an annual basis on their financial management and investment of trust funds. So the BAO has primarily three ways in which we regulate the sector and ensure that our licensees meet the compliance requirements. First and foremost is the education part, right? Education and guidance is key to start with. We provide our licensees with a lot of resources, and these resources are available on our website. We've provided them with a frequently asked question document. It's published. There's a separate one for licensees as a general document. There's one for financial compliance. It has more than 70 questions that we normally hear from our licensees on their confusion to do with financial compliance. So that is one. We have a compliance checklist. We have the care and maintenance calculator on our website. So apart from this, we do free webinars at the time of reporting, just before the reporting period starts or at the midst of it, to ensure that our licensees understand what they need to do. Because you need to understand, a lot of people exchange hands as well, right? Not one person stays at that position. People move, right? And there's a new person maybe every year at that
And we know
institution.
staffing is an issue right now too. I hadn't even
Exactly.
considered that, right?
Yes, that's an issue as
So
well.
then that continuity is tough.
Correct. And, it's not that a major concern from the funeral side, but from a cemetery's perspective, right? People change hands, and a new individual or staff need to be then trained. So we provide these webinars, which can help them in understanding where they need to be and what they need to report.
Right.
So that is the major chunk of what my team does. The second part is, of course, the reporting part. The Act requires
favorite.
everyone's least favorite, but the most important as well.
Yeah.
Right? Earlier you mentioned 4 billion. It's now at 4.9 billion.
Wow.
So we're going to cross 5 billion in the near future, right? And it's growing significantly.
Yeah, well, and we have the boomers coming down, right?
Exactly. Based on the stats, they're boomers that are eventually going to pass away. So, yeah. So in the reporting part, we required them to report on how things have been in the last 12 months, how they've collected money, deposited, invested, what sort of returns they've received. So that itself is a mechanism on how we ensure that they're in compliance. My team reviews all these reports that come in on an annual basis, and there are more than 3,000 forms.
I know, you and I talked about that. That visual, I still have that visual
Right.
from when we talked about that, the idea of your staff getting 3,000 PDF forms on your desk.
And then substituted with the
And then all of the support documents
the
for that,
support
right? Oh my
documents, right?
goodness.
Support documents, financial statement, transaction statements for the last 12 months, audit reports as well.
So
Looking
what
at
are
the
you guys
audit,
doing all day long, right?
this is exactly what we do, day in, day out.
So crazy.
Right. So that is the second way we help our licensees. And then the third part is the monitoring and enforcement. So we have a great team of inspectors who
You
are.
have the nice, like seriously, this the best people, your inspectors.
Yes, once
I
you
might
get
be
to
a bit
know
biased, but I
them,
love
right?
them.
The term inspector may not be welcomed, but then when you start speaking with them, right, these are people who are supporting the sector,
Yeah.
right?
And you have a lot of people from the sector, right?
Yes,
You have a lot of.
they're all from the sector.
Are they all from the sector?
The inspectors, the inspectors are all from the sector.
They're all from the sector now. Well, so you're coming in from a place of understanding.
Yes.
And I know your folks are just supportive in terms of, hey, here's how we can help.
Correct,
right?
correct.
Yeah.
So the inspectors, along with the financial compliance team, who are not from the sector, work together.
Yeah.
And we come across licensees who may have some gap in their compliance. We work with them. We support them. We give them the path that they need to follow to ensure that going forward, it does not happen again. Right. So these are three ways that we primarily support our licensees, and I feel it's working, in their favor as well.
That's awesome. So, with all of that support, where do you find the most common areas of confusion are?
So I'll speak from the financial compliance part. The first confusion that our licensees have is on the prepaid fund and the care and maintenance fund. Again, gap in education, I would say, and of course the lack of financial knowledge that they may have, or the lack of financial staff they may have. They are at times confused on how much money do we need to deposit, where do we need to deposit
Yeah.
it, how much return on investments can we utilize, and where can that be utilized? And that is where our team provides that educational support on a regular basis. That these are institutions where you need to place the money with, and then we work with those institutions as well. For example, GFD, right?
Yeah.
We're almost on in touch on a weekly basis,
That's right.
right? We have a licensee who needs support, so this is how we can guide them. Similarly, the Ontario Public Guardian and Trustee, who
Yep,
holds
yep.
a major market share in the cemeteries part,
Yep.
we work with them as well on how we can support licensees.
And I think that you and I have talked about this, right? The closer that we can work in terms of supporting one another just makes that everything much easier for the members, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that is something that we've learned, that these partnerships are important. Partnerships with the associations, with the financial institutions, would result in a benefit for our licensees. And we've seen the results, right? So yeah, coming back to the question, the second part is the financial reporting part, right? Again, due to the lack of financial professionals in the sector, our licensees find it difficult to interpret financial statements, right? There are a lot of terms that they might have not even heard of before,
I was
right?
totally there once, so I'm like going back in time to how that felt.
Right?
Yeah.
You've got dividends, you've got capital gains, realized, unrealized, and they're confused.
And who cares? Because I have 50 million things that I have to do right
Exactly, and that is sort of the least priority on their list. And I agree with them. They need to support families. That's their primary responsibility. So that is where we engage with them, all right? And we support them. We are like, this is how you need to read the statements.
right? Trying to simplify,
Try to
right?
simplify it. And we worked with a few financial institutions to make their reports easier to read,
Yeah.
or at least have a user manual sent with those financial statements so that they
Kind
can
of world
understand.
needs a user manual for
Right.
financial statements. But and I think that that's an obligation on financial institutions too, to make it understandable to the average person.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly, right? So these are two primary areas of confusion that we regularly see from our licensees. And again, our team is just a call away.
Yeah.
You know,
And your team is fabulous. For anyone listening, the financial compliance team is amazing. We've had meetings with you folks before, and just like so open and collaborative. It's
Right.
really wonderful.
Thank you
You've
very
built
much.
a wonderful team there.
For sure.
So to close, which I say this at every podcast, how are we here already near the end? But let's close off with care and maintenance. So Paul Taylor, who is Business Development Officer with GFD, I think you've met Paul before. I love how he speaks about care and maintenance. So he's a cemetery guy. Came from the cemetery sector from the time he was a teenager. He refers to care and maintenance as the heart and soul
For sure.
of any cemetery. So can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on that and why you feel that care and maintenance funds are so vital?
So let's step back one step and try to understand what the care and maintenance fund is all about,
Okay.
right? The care and maintenance fund is part of the legislation, and the objective of having that is to ensure that cemeteries are well kept and maintained for perpetuity. Forever, right? And that is the reason why it was once called as the perpetual care fund.
I remember those
right?
days. I'm that old.
Right? Now, of course, and this particular requirement to maintain a care and maintenance fund was introduced in 1955. So it's not something new. It's been there for decades.
But yeah, and even before pre-need legislation really came in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
So this predates all of us, right?
Thank you.
And the idea is you set aside money
Yep.
based on your sale or transfer or assignment of interim and scattering rights, markers, and you deposit that money into a perpetual fund, a care and maintenance fund, with an institution, a financial institution. And you can only utilize the return from those investments for the upkeep of cemetery, grass cutting, stabilizing of markers, for example. And of course, the most recent regulatory amendment can basically give them the opportunity to use the capital of the fund to increase the size of capacity, because
And which is a new thing.
which is a new thing, and it's sort of the need of time as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
With the shortage of inventory in the province.
Yeah.
So this was important to let our listeners know that this is what the care and maintenance fund is about. Without this particular fund, cemeteries would just go into disrepair. right? And cemeteries are a place where we need to sort of upkeep for families to grieve it. It is our heritage, it's our culture, right? And that is why it is important for this fund to be established. We've just in continuation, we've seen cemeteries that, not many, but a few, who failed to come into compliance, and for decades they've not been following the regulatory requirements to establish this fund. And
Yeah, and these
those
would be some of the smaller cemeteries, right?
very
Yeah.
small rural cemeteries. And what eventually happens is that the municipality, by law, would have to take them over. And
Right.
then that becomes a burden on the taxpayer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is something that we would really like to prevent,
Yeah.
right? Because again, as we mentioned earlier, that these cemetery professionals dedicate their life to the cemetery, and they do not want it to go to someone else,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Hamza, this has been such a pleasure talking to you. I feel like whenever you and I get together and talk about financial compliance, that we kind of talk about it all day long,
Yep.
right? We have a lot of similar views on it. However, we are at the end of our podcast already. And so this concludes this episode of the Digging Deep podcast. Hamza, thank you so much for joining us. We're just such a pleasure to have you today, and I'm sure we will have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. I'm your host, Heather Kiteley. Thanks to our listeners, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.